Kennedy, and I'm coming to you to read you another chapter in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Of course, J.K. Rowling, the author, has given permission to teachers and librarians to read during the COVID-19 closures her Harry Potter books. So I started with the first one, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I'm reading from the illustrated edition, and it was illustrated beautifully by Jim Kay. We're on chapter 3, Letters from No One. The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor earned Harry his longest punishment ever. By the time he was allowed out of the cupboard again, the summer holidays had started, and Dudley had already broken his new Cinecamera, crashed his remote control aeroplane, and, first time on his racing bike, knocked down old Mrs. Figg as she crossed Privet Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's gang, who visited the house every single day. Pierce, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all big and stupid, but as Dudley was the biggest and stupidest of the lot, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favorite sport, Harry hunting. This is why Harry spent as much time as possible outside of the house, wandering around, thinking about the end of the holidays, where he could see a tiny ray of hope. When September came, he would be going off to secondary school, and for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be with Dudley. Dudley had a place at Uncle Vernon's old school, Smeltings. Piers Polkiss was going there too. Harry, on the other hand, was going to Stonewall High, the local comprehensive. Dudley thought this was very funny. They stuff people's heads down the toilet the first day at Stonewall, he told Harry. Want to come upstairs and practice? No thanks, said Harry. The poor toilet's never had anything as horrible as your head down it. It might get sick. Then he ran, before Dudley could work out what he said. One day in July, Aunt Petunia took Dudley to London to buy his Smeltings uniform, leaving Harry at Mrs. Figg's. Mrs. Figg wasn't as bad as usual. It turned out she'd broken her leg tripping over one of her cats, and she didn't seem quite as fond of them as she did before. She let Harry watch television and gave him a bit of chocolate cake that tasted as though she had had it for several years. Ooh. That evening, Dudley paraded around the living room for the family in his brand new uniform. Smelting's boys wore maroon tailcoats, orange knickerbockers, and a flat straw hats called boaters. They also carried knobbly sticks, used for hitting each other while the teachers weren't looking. This was supposed to be good training for later in life. This is what Dudley looks like with his little Smelting's uniform on. As he looked at Dudley in his new knickerbockers, Uncle Vernon said gruffly that this was the proudest moment of his life. Aunt Petunia burst into tears and said she couldn't believe that her ickly Dudleykins, he looked so handsome and grown up. Harry didn't trust himself to speak. He thought two of his ribs might have already cracked from trying not to laugh. There was a horrible smell in the kitchen the next morning when Harry went for breakfast. It seemed to be coming from the large metal tub in the sink. He went to have a look. The tub was full of what looked like dirty rags swimming in gray water. What's this? He asked Aunt Petunia. Her lips tightened, as they always did when he dared to ask a question. Your new school uniform, she said. Harry looked at the bowl again. Oh, he said, I didn't realize it had to be so wet. Don't be stupid, snapped Aunt Petunia. I'm dyeing some of Dudley's old things gray for you. It'll look just like everyone else's when I've finished. Harry seriously doubted this, but he thought it was best not to argue. He sat down at the table and tried not to think about how he was going to look on his first day at Stonewall High, like he was wearing bits of old elephant skin, probably. Dudley and Vernon came in. Both wrinkled their nose because of the smell from Harry's new uniform. Uncle Vernon opened his newspaper as usual, and Dudley banged his smelting stick, which he carried everywhere, on the table. They heard the click of the letterbox and a flop of letters on the doormat. Get the post, Dudley, said Uncle Vernon from behind his paper. Make Harry get it. Get the post, Harry. Make Dudley get it. Poke him with your smelting stick, Dudley. Harry dodged the smelting stick and went to get the post. 3 things lay on the doormat. A postcard from Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, who was holidaying in the Isle of Wight, a brown envelope that looked like a bill, and a letter for Harry. Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart twinging like a giant elastic band. No one, ever in his whole life, had written him. Who would? He had no friends and no other relatives. He didn't belong to the library, so he never got rude notes asking for books back. Yet here it was, a letter addressed so plainly it could have been no mistake. Mr. Chpater, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The envelope was thick and heavy and made of yellowish parchment. The address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. Turning the envelope over, his hands trembling, Harry saw a purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake surrounding a large letter H. Hurry up, boy, shouted Uncle Vernon from the kitchen. What are you doing, checking the letter for bombs? He chuckled at his own joke. Harry went back into the kitchen, still staring at the letter. He handed Uncle Vernon the bill and the postcard and sat down and slowly began to open the yellow envelope. Uncle Vernon ripped open the bill, snorted in disgust, and flipped over the postcard. Marge is ill, he informed Aunt Petunia. Ate a funny whelk. Dad, said Dudley suddenly. Dad, Harry's got something. Harry was on the point of unfolding his letter, which was written on the same heavy parchment as the envelope, when it was jerked sharply out of his hands by Uncle Vernon. That's mine, said Harry, trying to snatch it back. He'd be rotting you, sneered Uncle Vernon, shaking the letter open with one hand and glancing at it. His face went from red to green faster than a set of traffic lights, and it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was the grayish white of old porridge. Petunia, he gasped. Dudley grabbed the letter to read it, but Uncle Vernon held it high out of his reach. Aunt Petunia looked curiously at the first line and read the first line. For a moment, it looked as though she might faint. She clutched her throat and made a choking noise. Vernon! Oh, my goodness, Vernon! They stared at each other, seeming to forget that Harry and Dudley were still in the room. Dudley wasn't used to being ignored. He gave his father a sharp tap on the head with a smelting stick. I want to read the letter, he said loudly. I want to read it, said Harry furiously, as it is mine. Get out, both of you, croaked Uncle Vernon, stuffing the letter back inside his envelope. Harry didn't move. I want my letter, he shouted. Let me see it, demanded Dudley. Out, roared Uncle Vernon. Then he took both Harry and Dudley by the scruffs of their necks and threw them into the hall, slamming the kitchen door behind them. Harry and Dudley promptly had a furious but silent fight over who would get to listen to the keyhole. Dudley won, so Harry, his glasses dangling from one ear, lay flat on his stomach to listen to the crack between the door and the floor. Vernon, Aunt Petunia was saying in a quivering voice, look at how it's addressed. How could they possibly know where he sleeps? You don't think they're watching the house? Watching, spying, might have been following us, muttered Uncle Vernon wildly. But what should we do, Vernon? Should we write back? Tell them we don't want... Harry could see Uncle Vernon's shiny black shoes pacing up and down the kitchen. No, he said finally. No, we'll ignore it. If they don't get an answer, yes, that's the best. We won't do anything. But I'm not having one in the house, Petunia. Didn't we swear when we took him in we'd stamp out that dangerous nonsense? That evening, when he got back from work, Uncle Vernon did something he'd never done before. He visited Harry in his cupboard. Where's my letter? Said Harry, the moment Uncle Vernon had squeezed through the door. Who's writing me? No one. It was addressed to you by mistake, said Uncle Vernon shortly. I have burned it. It was not a mistake, Harry said angrily. It had my cupboard on it. Silence, yelled Uncle Vernon, and a couple of spiders fell from the ceiling. He took a deep breath and forced his face to smile, which looked quite painful. Yes, Harry, about this cupboard. Your aunt and I have been thinking you're really getting a bit big for it. We think it might be more nice if you moved on to Dudley's second bedroom. Why? Said Harry. Don't ask questions, said his uncle. Take this upstairs now. The Dursleys' house had 4 bedrooms, one for Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, one for visitors, usually Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, and one where Dudley slept, and one where Dudley kept all his toys and things that wouldn't fit in his first bedroom. It only took Harry one trip upstairs to move everything he owned from the cupboard to this room. He sat down on the bed and stared around him. Nearly everything in here was broken. The month-old Cinecamera was laying on top of a small working tank Dudley had once driven over the next-door neighbor's dog. In the corner was Dudley's first television set, which he put his foot through when his favorite program had been canceled. There was a large birdcage, which once had a parrot that Dudley had swapped at school for a real air rifle, which was up on a shelf with the end all bent because Dudley had sat on it. Other shelves were full of books. They were the only things in the room that looked as though they'd never been touched. From downstairs came the sound of Dudley bawling at his mother. I don't want him in there. I need that room. Make him get out. Harry sighed and stretched out on the bed. Yesterday he'd have given anything to be up here. Today he'd rather be back in his cupboard with that letter than up here without it. The next morning at breakfast, everyone was rather quiet. Dudley was in shock. He'd screamed. He'd whacked his mother with a smelting stick. He'd been sick on purpose. He kicked his mother and had thrown his tortoise through the greenhouse roof, and he still didn't have his room back. Harry was thinking about this time yesterday and bitterly wishing he had opened the letter in the hall. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia kept looking at each other darkly. When the post arrived, Uncle Vernon, who seemed to be trying to be nice to Harry, made Dudley go and get it. They heard him banging things with a smelting stick all the way down the hall. Then he shouted, "There's another one! Mr. Chpater, the smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive." With a strangled cry, Uncle Vernon leapt from his seat and ran down the hall. Harry was right behind him. Uncle Vernon had to wrestle Dudley to the ground to get the letter from him, which was made difficult by the fact that Harry had grabbed Uncle Vernon around the neck from behind. After a minute of confusing fighting, in which everyone got hit a lot by the smelting stick, Uncle Vernon straightened up, gasping for breath, with Harry's letter clutched in his hand. "Go to your cupboard. I mean, your bedroom," he wheezed at Harry. "Dudley, just go." Harry walked round and round his new room. Someone knew he had moved out of his cupboard, and they seemed to know he hadn't received his first letter. Surely that meant they'd try again. At this time, he made sure, and this time he'd make sure that they didn't fail. He had a plan. Here is the fight between Dudley and Mr. Dursley and Harry for the letter. And that is where we're going to stop today. When we come back tomorrow, we will figure out what happens with this letter. You guys have a great, great day, and always keep reading.